How's it going, everyone? Welcome to the Always Up Too Late channel. My name is Jonathan, and today we're going to be taking a look at replacing the cruise control disconnect switch, I believe is what it's called. For me, it's a switch that's at the front of the master cylinder that's leaking currently, and I want to get that resolved because I believe it's leading me to have squishy brakes. Very recently, I was replacing the long brake line that goes from the front of the truck all the way to just above the rear axle, and I bled the brakes and everything, and got air out of everything, and it still had pretty squishy brakes, and I couldn't quite figure out where it was. Knocked the calipers with hammers, made sure there were no air bubbles, and there was some dripping coming from around the master cylinder, but nothing around the master cylinder. The seals and everything looked like they were still sealed, so everything was still dry. Everything was still pretty well dry, but as it turns out, this switch was part of a recall at some point in time by Ford, and I guess this truck wasn't part of the recall, and from what I understand, that this switch can actually fail. The fluid can come through the switch and cause a short on the wiring harness that it's attached to, which is like super dangerous. I mean, it could actually start a fire, and I think that it did cause some fires, and that's why it was part of the recall. So I have the replacement one. We can take a look at that, and then we'll just install it and test everything out. All right, and for a little bit of reference, this would be the master cylinder. This would be the tank that holds the brake fluid, and the switch that I'm talking about, you can see it just under the this line coming out right here. This is the switch right here, and it was actually leaking. I currently have the harness unplugged. Let me find the harness. Yeah, so the harness was plugged in like this. Yep, there we go. Okay, so the harness was plugged in like this, and it was pushing fluid through the switch out the back of the harness, and it was running on the harness, and it was dripping from this harness right here. You can see that it's actually still a little bit damp with brake fluid down this thing and down onto here. And I think it was a little bit easier for me to see it or catch it because there's quite a lot of space between the tire and the fender there because it's lifted. But yeah, it's actually coming right from that switch. And I hunted around everywhere. Like I looked around here, around the base of the tank, the back here, like underneath of here and everything. Everything else was dry. So then I narrowed it down to, yeah, it was that switch right there, and I started researching it, and that one, the red plug, is actually part of a recall. All right, and to take a look at the replacement kit, it is not only the sensor, but it's also a wiring harness and a zip tie. This is the part number, and I'll make sure to link these in the description below as well. But as you can see, this is the kit. It has an adapter harness because the plug on this end for the old sensor is different than the new one. It looks like they've updated that and included a zip tie to take care of the extra cable as well. And with everything open here, I'm going to go ahead and take the cap off of the end there, and I'm going to go ahead and prime this with a little bit of brake fluid to try to reduce the amount of air that we're going to introduce into the system. And I don't really have a good way of doing this, so I'm just going to kind of drop it in there, kind of like this. Okay, looks like we have all of the air bubbles out of the end of the sensor, so I'll just go ahead and wipe off all of the extra that we got around it here. Okay, and then I'm going to leave it sitting upright, and I'm going to put this cap back on it like that. Okay, you can see that I have an aftermarket air filter here with aftermarket intake elbow. If you have the factory intake box, you may need to remove that to get to this, but I think I can actually get the wrench down on it. Yeah, so using a 15mm wrench. Go. Okay. I'm gonna try to loosen this thing. Okay. Got it loose there. Alright, so we have the new switch ready to go, and we have the old one loose, and it looks like the new switch takes a 7/8. Okay, we got a little drip going on there. So try to get this one back in. Okay, got the new switch installed here. Just gonna wipe everything down real quick and try to keep as much of that brake fluid from going on anything that it hasn't already dripped on. I'm gonna need to do some cleaning and painting, I think, with all the brake fluid that's come out of this thing. Okay, that's pretty secure, it looks like. Alright, now that we have the switch installed, we're going to go ahead and update the harness that's connected to it. Looks like this end goes into the factory plug, which is the rectangle shaped one, and then this one plugs into the new switch, it looks like. It says that push button thing. So the harness itself is still coated in some brake fluid. I'm just going to go ahead and use one of these blue towels to just wipe it down and clean it up and try to get as much of that stuff off there as possible. Okay, yeah, it looks like there's fluid all the way down in that plug too. So that means that the fluid was pushing through the sensor across the electrical connectors and then out the backside of this plug. Alright, so the new plug, looks like we can plug in the factory end here. Let's see, is it directional? Okay, looks like it only goes in one way, that's good. And then this goes into that, just like that. And then they supply a zip tie. Okay, for the zip tie, I couldn't really find anywhere up top a great place to zip tie it, so I pulled it down, and right here where the loop happens in this wiring harness, I zip tied it to this brake line. I don't think that'll cause any problems, but I'll keep an eye on this just to make sure. And taking a look at the old switch, you can see the part number there, F3TA 9F924CA. Looking at it, you can see that it's definitely corroded. I mean, it doesn't look all that good. It's been on there for quite a long time. But I think the most interesting part is looking inside of that. You can see that it's actually wet in there from brake fluid. So it's no wonder that they recalled these things. I mean, it's definitely dangerous to have liquid right around electrical connectors, and some of the trucks, from what I understand, were wired to where this was always hot, which is where the fire hazard comes in. I did test my truck last night when I read that, and there was no power coming through like either lead on the 2000 at least this one. But that's not to say that there couldn't be power going through it for whatever reason. Alright, we have the new switch installed and the adapter harness is plugged into the factory harness. I believe that some people may need to bleed their brakes depending upon how bad it was leaking, or if it was leaking, or if you're just updating it just out of the concern that it could be an issue. I'm going to go ahead and bleed the brakes in this one because I've had squishy brakes because of the giant, the big long brake line that blew out. And I want to make sure that I just get rid of all of the possible air in the system. I do believe that this one was probably pulling in some air or something. So I'm going to go ahead and bleed the brakes just to eliminate any possibility of it being anything else. So I'll go ahead and do that real quick, and then we'll start this thing up and go for a test drive. All right, we got everything pretty well buttoned up here. We can shut the hood, and we'll go ahead and give this thing a start up and see if it fixed the squishy brakes problem. All right, and we just got back from the test drive, and the brakes are definitely better. Still a little bit squishy. I think that when the brake line burst, it probably did end up damaging the master cylinder when the brake went all the way to the floor, because the master cylinder usually isn't in that position, and if it's older, it can score some of the parts that need to seat together really nice, because there are parts that haven't been in that position in quite a long time. So I do believe that the next video that I'm gonna put together is going to be of me installing a master cylinder in this truck. It looks like it's pretty straightforward to install, so I will be replacing that in the very near future. But other than that, I do believe that this kit, the upgrade kit for that sensor, definitely pretty straightforward to put together. It looks like Ford knew what they were doing when they at least put together the replacement. So yeah, everything went together real nice, and now I don't have to worry about the leaky sensor or that being a potential fire hazard. I'll definitely see if yours is covered under the recall. My last 7.3 that was 2000 was, but for whatever reason, length of time, not sure, I actually had to purchase this one, and it was a little bit more expensive from the local dealer than it would have been if I bought it on the internet somewhere, but I wanted to put it in today so that way I could figure out if we had got the whole brake situation sorted out. So that's going to wrap up today's video. Thank you very much for stopping in, and I will catch you in the next video.